Hey everybody, we're going to get started in about 30 seconds, just give people a little bit more time to join. All right. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for attending. We'll get started here. So in today's session, we're going to provide an overview of Launch School's Capstone program. By the end of today's session, we hope you'll have a clear picture of the goals of the program, what it looks like on a day-to-day basis, and how it accelerates students' paths to software engineering careers. To start, I wanted to quickly introduce the folks who run the Capstone program. Max, and prior to this, I was a software engineer at a company called Gatsby, which was recently acquired by Netlify. I was also a graduate of the Capstone program in spring 2020. I'm also joined by Surgeon Charge, who is here in the chat, and Nick Miller, who is on paternity leave. Collectively, we manage and run the program. So to give you an idea of what the next hour or so will look like, during the first half of this session, we'll dive into what the Capstone curriculum looks like in more detail, along with describing what it looks like for students day to day. We'll cover how teams develop their Capstone project and take a look at how we support folks during their job search. We'll wrap up with details on admission into Capstone. In the second half of the session, we'll then open up for questions. So before we dive into the day-to-day of Capstone, I wanted to frame the intent of the program and how it extends upon the core curriculum. Over the course of the core curriculum, we emphasize a mastery of the fundamentals of programming and problem solving. During this period of time, we take a bottom-up approach to learning programming patterns and concepts, along with the key components of server-side web applications, including networking, web servers, and relational databases. These are the fundamental topics required to start building a career in software development. The Capstone program is designed to drive graduates to a career-launching job. And as such, it introduces students to the day-to-day challenges of large production systems. So as a brief example, in core, you dive into topics like, how does a web browser make a request to a web server? How does a web server handle the incoming request? How do you store and retrieve data from a relational database? How do you use SQL to build complex queries of your data? By contrast, in Capstone, we begin to discuss questions like, what are the strategies to balance request load between multiple servers, and what are their trade-offs? How do you synchronize data across database replicas, and how might the read-write patterns affect your strategy? Or what are the common strategies if you find a certain set of data is accessed more frequently than others? Now, this is just a small example of the types of discussions that we begin to have, but the primary question that drives many Capstone conversations is this: what happens when code meets data at scale? More broadly, conversations move from discussions of single applications to discussions of systems and multiple interconnected pieces of infrastructure. From code and data that sits on a single machine to code and data that are replicated across multiple machines. From code and programming patterns to data and data access patterns. From methodologies like PDAC to solve specific problems, to discussions of trade-offs between multiple competing solutions. And from work that is primarily individual to work that's primarily team-based. Now, I want to zoom on that last point a little bit further. One of the biggest differences between core and Capstone, in my opinion, is that you move from coding primarily on your own to collaborating with other people. Collaboration is a key feature of Capstone. Give you an idea, recent capstone cohorts have had between 20 and 40 people. Cohorts are grouped into teams of 3 or 4 students, and these teams work together on homework and exercises and build their capstone project together during the second half of the program. This collaborative environment is a vital piece to capstone because that's how professional engineers work to build large applications in teams. So companies look for folks who not only have strong technical skills, but proven ability to work effectively within a team setting. Folks who can communicate and collaborate on technical projects. This is why this is such an emphasis during capstone. And along the way, we provide students with resources and coaching to develop their ability to communicate, code, and even debate each other effectively, especially in demanding situations. So let's take a look at the general syllabus for capstone. In the first 2 weeks, we focus on the time and space complexity of code, how algorithms and data structures you use to solve problems affect the time and memory the machine uses to run the application. Over the next 2 weeks, we dive into the design of distributed systems and the fundamental trade-offs and concerns of working with data at scale. For the next 4 weeks, we move toward the front of the stack, building applications using React and discussing common front-end architectural patterns and performance challenges. We also examine API design in production systems and discuss the emerging impact of cloud and edge platforms on web rendering. Now, during these weeks, teams also begin the research for their capstone projects, which I'm going to cover a bit more later. In weeks 9 through 16, teams implement their capstone projects, generally spending the first 4 weeks on coding and the final few weeks on documenting their work with an in-depth case study. In week 17 and beyond, students begin applying for jobs. All of the areas that we cover here are driven by both the concerns of working engineers and also the topics and skills that most frequently come up during job interviews. So, for example, data structures and algorithms prepares you for technical screens and whiteboarding exercises. Distributed systems prepares you for a type of interview called the system design interview. But more importantly, it fills in your mental map of how production systems are architected, enabling you to have in-depth conversations with engineers during interviews. Our full stack and API work covers the types of challenges typical to take-home exercises that some companies use during their interview process. And of course, the capstone project and case study are the cornerstones of your job search. They demonstrate the depth of your technical expertise. So to reiterate, the capstone syllabus is intended to mirror the work and challenges you see in day-to-day software engineering, as well as prepare you for the types of exercises that come up in the job search. So now let's dive a little bit deeper into what the day-to-day experience of capstone looks like. During the first 8 weeks, capstone consists of cohort-based lectures, team exercises, and individual work. In general, the first half of your day will be spent on lectures and exercises as a cohort. Now, this is the synchronous part of the day. Everyone on the cohort joins the call. In the second half of the day, you focus on homework. Now, this can consist of exercises or small projects that you work on with your team, as well as additional readings or videos that you work on individually. Now, most students typically spend around 8 to 10 hours a day on coursework during this phase. Beginning week 5, teams begin the research for their capstone project, and beginning week 9, teams focus full-time on implementing their projects. During this phase, students and teams organize their own time, generally working as professional engineering teams do, beginning the day with a brief scrum to review remaining work, and then working solo or in teams to develop their features, and meeting with their project mentor a few times a week. Now, there's no set daily schedule here. This is completely up to the team. Once work on the project wraps up, the focus shifts to producing a comprehensive case study that describes the background, architecture, and challenges of the project. Now, I want to point out that we consider this case study as crucial of a deliverable as the project itself. And that's because, as I mentioned earlier, your ability to work as a software engineer goes beyond the technical. Your ability to communicate your work to others is part of what will make you stand out as a candidate. Now, one of the most common questions we get from course students is, how did these teams come up with their project? Like, you see here an open source orchestration framework for the deployment of user entity data. How does anybody come up with that? And that's a totally reasonable question. The truth is that we intentionally structure Capstone in such a way that helps students uncover and eventually build expertise around these sorts of interesting engineering challenges. And we do this in steps. First, during our system design weeks, we expose students to a variety of new problem domains, from database design to caching to real-time communication. We fill in your mental map of typical application architectures and topologies with a specific focus on the problems and trade-offs that drive various solutions. Next, during our project ideation weeks, we have students perform directed research into engineering problem domains. And usually by the end of this process, teams have produced 10 to 20 research summaries of specific technologies and the problems that those technologies solve. This research leads teams to the problem domains that they're interested in. Finally, as teams define the shape of their project, we connect each team with a project mentor. Now, this is a working software engineer that uses their experience to provide feedback and help teams clarify their project scope and trade-offs. Ultimately, Capstone projects tackle the same types of problems that working engineers encounter. That's why, from the beginning of Capstone, we provide a structured path to being able to see, discuss, and ultimately solve these problems. Now, once the project wraps up, students transition to their job search. And we continue to provide support here along several dimensions. From the outset, we provide a set of resources and guidance on job search strategies that tend to be the most effective. This includes development of your career transition narrative and feedback on your resume and other career artifacts. Students work with job hunt mentors, and these are different from the project mentors that they worked with earlier. And these mentors are also Capstone graduates that are familiar with our approach and provide day-to-day feedback and guidance on how to approach upcoming interviews. Students continue to meet regularly in small group and one-on-one sessions. And the reason that we do this is because, in our estimation, the most difficult part of the job search for most students is not technical, but it's psychological, it's emotional. And frankly, applying for jobs, receiving rejections, preparing for weeks and sometimes months can be draining, and it's difficult to go at it alone. For this reason, we provide support from teammates and staff even deep into the process. And when students receive offers, we spend time helping them through the negotiation process. It's common for students to have multiple outstanding offers, and we're happy to help students think through the role that is best for them. We also help students negotiate increases in base salary and bonuses. So if you'd like to apply for Capstone, we'd love to be in touch. We run 3 cohorts a year, and the typical dates for each cohort are listed here. We're actually starting our summer cohort next week. The admission date that you see there is when we make admissions decisions, but just be aware that you need to have completed core by that time to be eligible. So if you're targeting a specific cohort, it's really important that you get in touch with us well before the admissions date, ideally months in advance. Now I'll go into more detail on this in the next slide, but in summary, you can reach out to us at capstone@launchschool.com at any time if you have questions. We recommend reaching out to us even if you only have a small interest in participating in Capstone. To give you an idea of what a typical application process looks like, after the JS 175 and RB 189 assessments, we send you a link to a Capstone interest form. If you missed this survey or didn't fill out the survey and you're past this point in the curriculum, feel free to just email us at capstone@launchschool.com. Now, typically students that complete 189 are around 6 months from completing core, though obviously this varies pretty widely depending on your individual pace. But that should help you get a general idea of what cohort you might be targeting. Now, once you have applied either through the Capstone interest form or by emailing us directly, we'll add you to the interest list for those future cohorts. Around 3 months before your preferred cohort, we check in to confirm your current place in the curriculum and just let you know in general whether we think you're on track for admission, though this isn't a guarantee. We make admissions decisions about 2 months before the start of the cohort. If you're admitted and you wish to accept, then you make a small deposit to secure your place in the program. And at that point, we send you the Capstone prep materials and the fun begins. So one common question that we get about performance in core is how it affects Capstone admission. Well, to put it succinctly, we expect eligible Capstone students to graduate with both high technical marks and non-technical marks across most of their assessments. Now, to be clear, a lower grade or a conditional pass or even a not yet on an individual assessment is not going to disqualify you from Capstone. We look at your performance over time. But, to further improve your chances at admission, being a warm and helpful community member and participating in one of the seasonal seminars that are held by TAs and core staff can definitely be helpful. The actual admissions percentage in the Capstone is actually quite high, and that's because most students who finish core with high marks are already job ready and, in our opinion, qualified for Capstone. In addition, just be aware that Capstone is a full-time commitment and there aren't any exceptions to this. Capstone students participate on average about 45 to 50 hours a week during the program, sometimes a little bit more. So just be prepared to make that commitment for 4 to 7 months, depending on the length of your job search. The Capstone fee is an income sharing agreement. It is 18% of your first year base salary or $18,000, whichever is higher. And it's important to note that the Capstone or the Launch School ISA only looks at the base salary in your offer. So things like bonuses when you get hired, equity compensation, raises, none of that are included in that 18%. And I also wanted to touch on location requirements. Now, Capstone is open to all students. We've actually seen that as engineering companies have increasingly gone remote and hybrid over the past few years, we've had students from many countries outside the US successfully land great jobs after Capstone. That being said, if you live outside of the US, Canada, or the UK, then please get in touch with us at capstone@launchschool.com to discuss some of the unique factors of your time zone or local job market. So that wraps up today's introduction to the Capstone program, and I hope that I've covered many of the questions that you had in mind. But that being said, I'd love to open it up to any other questions that you have. So feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom call, and I'll try to answer as many questions as I can before the top of the hour. And Surgeon is also here to answer questions as well. So the first question I see here is, what criteria do you use to gauge whether someone is eligible for Capstone outside of the core performance requirements? Yeah, so generally, the performance of people on assessments is the main factor that we use. So that includes both the technical and non-technical grades that you get on your assessment. But in addition to that, as I said, we take how people interact with the community, very seriously. So people who are warm, welcoming, who are helpful to others, that can definitely help you stand out in a capstone application for sure. Surgeon, did you have anything else to add there?
No, I just wanted to ask you to change slide to admissions timeline on student asks.
Oh, sure.
So we can keep it there, I think.
Yeah.
So not that one, I think admissions. Yeah, that one.
Cool. Awesome.
I think you answered everything, other than if Cedric has a follow-up question.
Yeah, if you have a follow-up question, feel free to answer, or feel free to ask it. Is the webinar being recorded? We're not going to be sharing this recording of the webinar, but we are going to be holding information sessions like these every couple of months. So for those who weren't able to make it today, there will be an opportunity to do another session like this pretty soon in the future. A question from Sarah. I'm in JS 230, completed the first assessment in RB 109 in July 2020. Do I need to retake the assessments because I'm beyond 18 months from completing JS 239? Yeah, interesting question. So there have been cases where we've asked people to retake assessments if they are beyond 18 months from completing them. But generally, we'll only ask people to retake those assessments if there's some sort of reason where we're not confident that they've retained the information. But if their assessments over the past 18 months have been solid, then we generally have confidence that there isn't going to be any issue, particularly on like a 109 level interview. Next question. Do groups work together on a single case study, or does each team member make their own case study? Yeah, so it varies. It varies. So during that project ideation phase, sometimes team members do team up and everybody kind of studies one particular domain or one particular research area for a given night. And they sort of combine all the research that they do to fill in the gaps. And then sometimes each individual team member wants to go off and do a little bit of their own research, and they come back and they teach each other what they've learned in these different project domains. So there's quite a bit of flexibility during that project ideation period. Generally, what we advise people and teams to do at the beginning of project ideation is to go wide. So rather than immediately committing to any one particular engineering domain or topic, we like people to get exposure to a variety of different ones. And then over time, narrow down. So after they go wide for about a week or so, we like people to go deeper into one or maybe two particular areas that are interesting to the entire team. And as you go deeper, you can continue to research and find the interesting challenges in that domain. How much is the deposit for the Capstone program? I believe it's $1,500 right now. Surgeon, do you know off the top of your head if that? I think it's been that for a long time.
I don't, unfortunately know the number.
Yeah. I believe it is. If that's an issue though, reach out to us at capstone@launchschool.com. We can talk. Same question here. Is age a factor in acceptance to Capstone? No, it is not. My main concern in terms of job search, it's not a factor. And we've had folks who are in your age range in Capstone before. of the job searches that I've seen, which has probably been over 100 at this point, I haven't seen age be any sort of particular factor in terms of people having successful capstone outcomes. And it's not something that we would consider in terms of acceptance in the capstone at all. How's the current job market affected the quality and timeline of capstone graduates' job placements? Yeah, great question. So this is something that has come up a lot over the past couple of months. Obviously, people have kind of seen the news about layoffs at big tech companies, and they're curious about how that affects the prospects of capstone graduates. The short answer is that what we have seen in general is that the length of the job search has increased a little bit. So if the mean time to getting a job offer about a year ago was 8 weeks, then now it's probably closer to 12, 13 weeks. We haven't, because the current cohort hasn't finished yet, we don't have the exact numbers there, but I would say that it's probably increased the mean time to getting an offer, increased a little bit. In terms of the quality of the jobs, that hasn't really significantly been affected, nor has people's performance on technical interviews, right? So for example, one might consider the possibility that because the market has tightened a little bit, that the technical bar during interviews on average for companies has changed in some way. And we haven't found that to be the case. So as capstone graduates are interviewing for jobs, they do about as well as they were doing last year. The thing that has noticeably slowed down is the amount of job interviews they get over time. And that's why the mean time to job offer has extended a little bit. So don't have specific numbers on that yet to share, but that's the general trend that we've seen so far. When we say that all the curriculum needs to be completed within the last 18 months, oh yeah, so I believe I answered that, but again, the quick answer is that we may ask people to retake, but generally we don't, as long as your performance has been strong, over that 18 months.
I think we have an interesting question in chat.
Yeah.
Might be a bit longer for me to write. I was answering other questions.
Go ahead.
It says, what would you say would be the most challenging part of capstone that participants mentioned? And I think it's an interesting question because I think the fast-paced environment of capstone is probably the most challenging thing. I think all core students are used to going through core at their own pace, which can take, anywhere between, 8 to 10 months to 2 years, right, or more. It doesn't matter. Students are finishing core and they need to master the material. In capstone, we have fixed dates, right? So we have 2 weeks for algorithms, 2 weeks for system design, and so on and so forth. And time is limited, right? And you need to not master, but you need to learn as much as possible within the fixed time limit. And just adjusting to that philosophy, so to just-in-time learning from core can be challenging. So I think that's the most difficult thing for students. Max, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's a great answer. And I would agree with that. I think that probably the two biggest differences between core and capstone are, one, as you said, sort of the pace, because we're synchronous, and then, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, that you're working with a team, right? And so working with a team, building things collaboratively is just different than when you can work solo. I'd say for the most part, though, it's probably the pace of capstone that is the most challenging part. It's rarely ever the technical ability. People do great on the technical side of things. It's usually the pace.
Yeah, I agree. We have another question. I think Max, you can answer it from chat. It says, what specific job roles and positions, programming languages, and skills do graduates from Launch School Capstone program in software engineering typically apply for in the industry? So what
Yeah.
do they apply for typically?
Yeah, so generally Capstone students target what we call mid-level software engineering roles, generally full stack, but people apply across the board for back end, front end, full stack roles. And in terms of languages, because Capstone and Launch School, as you know, focuses on JavaScript and Ruby, and then in Capstone, we also introduce Go. Those are probably the most common languages of the roles that people target. But we've had other, people target Python roles, for example. By the time you get out of Capstone, if you're interviewing for a Python role, for example, you have a lot of confidence to generally ramp up pretty quickly. And many companies, as long as you can demonstrate, general software engineering skills in a language, they're confident that you can ramp up in whatever language they happen to be using, unless they're specifically looking for an expert in that programming language. Yeah, and one other question we sometimes get is, Capstone tends to focus a lot on kind of more back-end oriented roles. Does that in some way exclude me from front-end oriented roles? And the answer to that is no as well. I would say we have probably increased our focus on front-end and full stack within the curriculum over the past year or so as well. And that's partially just because of the changing way that web applications are built. And we've also seen that, we've had some very successful students come out of Capstone getting essentially pure front-end roles. So while it's not, I would say, the explicit focus of Capstone, for people who are interested in front-end and don't want to exclude themselves from that, that's not something that I would be concerned about. For example, after I graduated Capstone, I went into a more front-end oriented role myself. Let's see, looking through the questions here.
We have a question about current class times for Capstone. I would say it's usually class times are between 8 a.m. and 12 p.m. Pacific. Those are morning sessions. And then after week 5, we have afternoon session, which starts at 1 p.m. And usually it's about one hour long. So that would be like a fixed class time. That's for Sparkle.
Yeah. So generally 4 hours in the beginning of the day. And then people spend usually 4 to, depending on the amount of work, 4 to 8 hours in the second half of their day. Some of that is synchronous with their team. Some of that might be homework. But I'd say generally it's closer to 4 to 6 hours in the second half of their day. We rarely, I think, have people doing kind of like 12-hour days. That's not typical.
That's actually not advisable, because you can't sustain that for 16 weeks.
Exactly.
It's not possible. We have a question: during the job hunt phase, do students seek out applications themselves, or do you resource and provide them with applications? I think it's the former one.
Yeah, that's the former. So students look for job applications themselves. So we're not directly sourcing or working with, recruiters or anything like that. Students are going and looking for job opportunities themselves. We do, the guidance that we provide is largely around sort of how to structure your job hunt in a way that we find tends to be productive. That includes sort of the amount of time in terms of the studying and preparation that you do for interviews, the amount of job applications to put out in a given day, and how to prepare for the various different types of interviews as they come along. But we don't surface specific job applications to people. Continuing to look through the questions here. How flexible is the payment of 18,000 if we have trouble finding a job or if we are hired but then laid off? Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question to have because the industry has become a little bit more volatile. So I would say that there is flexibility. That's something that you would work out with staff. In general, the timeline to pay off the ISA is 2 years. So even if you have some trouble or get laid off, you do have flexibility, but we're very understanding, especially in this kind of climate. So it's something that we would discuss with you individually and work out if that were the case.
We have a question. Does academic or professional work experience impact capstone chances? For example, high school graduate vs product manager applying. I would say no, because we had very young students finishing capstone. So, you know, I'm applying for capstone. So yeah, I would say it doesn't matter what your background is for capstone admissions.
We've seen successful folks from all sorts of backgrounds, from no college to coming from like an industry trade, to people that come from you know, more traditional tech backgrounds and like PM or something like that. That hasn't really affected people's outcomes at all. Yeah, I haven't really seen it. I would say that, you know, if you have a more traditional tech-oriented background, it may be, you might get responses from companies a little bit more quickly. And that's just because as they're doing their pattern matching, as when they're looking through resumes, if you have that kind of typical background, you know, it might look, you know, just more usual for them. But we haven't seen any differences in outcomes, and that includes the time to offer, or the quality of the offer, the salary, the base salary. We haven't seen any differences there. So, yeah.
I think the answer for Tim, who said, when should the core be finished for August cohort, I would say it's 1st July. So you should finish core by 1st July. It said just over a month ago. Yeah, it should have been just over 2 months from now. And I would just encourage everyone to send questions in the Q&A. I'm trying to answer in chat, but it's hard to keep track of what questions I did answer because I cannot remove them once I answer. But yeah, I'll keep answering questions in chat. We have a question about how much work is the capstone prep material to go through. Well, it's a lot of work. We have extended that from 1 month to 1 month and a half. One student asked if that's like a full-time, like a full-time job. I would say it's not. It's not a full-time job, but it does require you to work probably daily, maybe for a couple of hours, definitely, right? So it's a lot. It's not something that you can do like 1 or 2 hours a day and that's it, right? We did extend it for a reason to 1 month and a half. Max, I don't know if you want anything to add.
No, that's on point. Generally, it's we again account for about 6 weeks of work, but it's generally not 6 weeks full time going through it. But you'll definitely want a good amount of time to get through it, and it generally takes people 4 to 6 weeks to get through. Yeah.
We have another question, and I just scrolled out of it. Yeah, so if you had to sum up the biggest benefits of Capstone in employers' eyes, what would those be? Like group work, larger scale project?
Yeah, so I would say that particularly for people transitioning into software engineering, when you talk to employers, you're sort of asking them to make an unconventional bet, which is I've done a lot of work, but I don't have production experience in engineering. Production meaning an application that's live to customers or a large user base, right? And so you want to send as many signals to them as possible that you have experience commensurate with production level experience, right? And so that is why the Capstone program is really tailored around the Capstone project, because the way that the research process is structured for the project, the way that the implementation is structured, and also the way that you kind of document and communicate the project via the case study are very similar to the ways these things are done with working software engineers. And so by providing this level of evidence, you sort of de-risk the bet for employers that are looking to determine, hey, this person seems to have, plenty of skills, plenty of talent, but how can we kind of de-risk the bet that because they haven't had prior production experience, that they're going to be able to come into the company and thrive pretty quickly. So I'd say that that is sort of the biggest benefit of Capstone is the experience, not only coding the project, it's not the code that's the deliverable, but it's the experience of research, collaboration, implementation, and also communication, articulation of the project's challenges and architecture. Those tend to be the biggest benefits. For students outside of the US, does Launch School offer any ins at companies in the industry, or does the job hunt assistance entirely consist of behind the scenes support? Generally, it's behind the scenes support. We don't have any ins at companies in the industry, though we do have relationships with some employers. And if those employers do have open positions, in the past, sometimes they've come and spoken to people that are on the job search to sort of pitch working at their company. And those have resulted in referrals and jobs in the past. But we don't have any sort of structured, relationships with companies that provide direct pathways into those companies.
We have some questions in the chat specifically for the payments outside of US and Canada. Do we provide flexibility? I don't know if you know the answer to that. Like, is the flexibility of payment open to, for example, Japan? That was the question.
Yeah, I don't know about the logistics of payments outside the US, but definitely email that question and fill in your situation to capstone@launchschool.com, and we can handle that.
And we have another question. Sorry.
I was just going to add, just broadly, we have had Capstone students in Japan, for example, though. So, so it's something that we've been able to handle.
Yeah. So we have a question. It's a bit specific, but the student asks that the student is looking for a relatively lower level programming job. So that's the student's main interest, and he is interested if any graduates end up in positions where they're doing relatively lower level programming, and would Capstone LS be the right path for that?
Lower level programming. Well, I say that the focus of the Capstone curriculum is, as I mentioned, on data, on cloud infrastructure, and web applications. And understanding those topics can definitely lead you to a lower level programming position. So I'm imagining, and correct me if I'm wrong, correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, but imagine you're talking about things like working at sort of like an operating system level, or maybe more of like a networking level. I would say that one follow-up program, usually a year or two out from getting their first software engineering. We've had some Capstone graduates do, I think it's called the Bradfield computer science program, which I think covers those sorts of lower level computer science engineering concerns. We have had people who have wanted to go in that direction, do that as a follow-up program, usually a year or two out from landing their job, their first job. A question from Rosa: can a student decide to wait one cohort to start Capstone? What is the longest one can wait and still do Capstone? Like if you wanted to work for a bit longer before being able to quit your job. Yeah, you can delay. You can delay. I don't know that there's sort of a hard limit on the amount of time. We've had people delay for, for example, I'd say maybe 6 months, maybe even a little bit longer. And there are some additional resources that we can provide people with besides the capstone prep work if they have a little bit of time on their hands before starting the capstone prep work, because we don't release that until 8 weeks before the program begins. So there is some flexibility there. Happy to have that conversation if you're in that scenario. Does the Capstone program focus on Ruby or JavaScript, or is it a mixture of both languages? So in Capstone, we actually use Go for our data structures and algorithms weeks. And Go is a language that you will learn during Capstone Prep. And after that, we primarily use JavaScript, and we're going to be transitioning to TypeScript probably before the end of this year. For the remainder of Capstone. So those are the two primary languages you use. We don't currently use Ruby in the exercises and lectures. Now, if a team wanted to build their project in Ruby, they'd certainly be free to do so. You're free to implement your projects in whatever language you want. But in terms of the actual lectures and exercises that we do, those are going to be in Go and JavaScript.
We have another question in chat that's going to be harder for me to type. It says earlier you mentioned that Capstone students say the pace is most challenging part. Is pace referring to the increased volume and variety of material to quickly understand and implement? If so, what can students do during core to prepare for that faster pace? Yes, it's increased volume and variety of material. And what can you do in core? In core, you should try to master the material and do well in terms of grades, both technical and non-technical. So core and capstone have kind of different purpose in core to master the material, purpose in capstone to go over a lot of different topics. I wouldn't say that you have to do anything to prepare. What we say to students when they start is just you need to accept that you won't be able to master all the topics, right? So the issue is the anxiety that comes from, hey, we covered something, but I haven't mastered it yet. You didn't master it because we didn't have time for that, but that's okay, right? We want you to have exposure to a lot of different topics, but it doesn't mean that you need to master them. So just having that shift of mentality from, I need to master this, that's core, to I want to have exposure to something, right? So I would say you don't need to do anything special to prepare. When you're in core, focus on core. When you come to capstone, you will adjust.
Yep. Agreed. Question from Daniel: what kind of success have career changers, say 5+ years in previous career, have in the job search? How concerned are employers about specific details of previous career, assuming the career is not related to coding? Well, I'll say a couple things here. First, the majority of the vast majority of capstone students are people changing careers, changing fields. Probably 95+%, if not more. So that's the majority of people. And so on the whole, they've been very successful. But to your specific question around like how concerned are employers about the specific details of your previous career, a couple of thoughts here. So the first is that people who transition into engineering are actually fairly common these days. Like career transitioners are not a rare occurrence in engineering, and therefore when recruiters encounter them, it's not necessarily a surprise or seen in any sort of specifically negative light. Now, you do, again, because you don't have previous experience in a production system, you do need to demonstrate that you have, the skills commensurate with somebody who has had some of that experience. So that's specifically what the Capstone program is designed to enable you to do. Now, the second part, though, about, what about the specific details of your previous career? I would say that this is a little bit related to what I mentioned earlier in terms of your career transition narrative. And this is something that we talk about a lot with people who are starting the job hunt. The way that you are kind of frame your previous career, what you learned from it, and how it informed, the skills that you'll be bringing into your new career as an engineer, the way you tell that story is important. And we provide resources and feedback to help people kind of structure that narrative in a way that will hopefully land for employers. I would say that, so one of the things that I've said to students in the past is that your prior experience outside of engineering is a strength, because you have likely picked up skills that people who have gone straight from, say, a computer science program directly into working engineers, you may have skills, you likely have skills that they probably haven't had the opportunity to pick up. And when companies are looking for software engineers, as I mentioned, they're not just looking for technical skills, they're looking for well-rounded individuals that can work effectively with a team, that can communicate well and build relationships with others. And that is, those skills are built in many different careers, right? So I would say, try to think about your previous career experience as a strength. And then part of the challenge as you move into software engineering is thinking about how you can tell that story about the strengths that you had from your previous career and how they will connect to your future career.
Okay, we have a couple of similar questions, so I think we should answer them here. So when are the Capstone projects teams decided, and how does Alice decide on the groups, or it's left up to students? So basically, teams are decided now around the time when the prep begins. We are making that decision based on teams' preferences. So if someone has preferences, we take that into account. And aside from that, we take into account time zones, so where students live, because if they live or they are in a similar time zones, that's going to make their life easier when they work together. And that's pretty much it. I know someone asked, do we take into account the track like Ruby or JavaScript? We don't. And yeah, so basically just student preferences plus time zones. We try to make it as much comfortable to students as possible.
Yep. There are a lot of questions here, so I'm gonna, go ahead.
Yeah, there is how important is work history and resume eligibility for Capstone. I would say for Capstone, we don't take that into consideration. So just think about your core performance, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. I see a couple of questions about paying upfront. We don't currently offer the option to pay upfront for Capstone. For students outside of the US, Canada, or the UK, for example, Asia, are there differences in terms of job search supports provided, since the staff might not be familiar with the local job market? Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I'd say broadly, we don't have a tailored sort of job search support per market. what we try to do is work with people as on an individual basis. So to the extent that you can help us understand the job market, we will try and provide support there. But we don't really offer tailored support for the local job market. That's an interesting question, though. This is why when I mentioned earlier, if you are outside of those regions, it's really helpful to get in touch with us at capstone@launchschool.com, because this is the conversation that we want to have ahead of starting Capstone, so that we're all on the same page. Another interesting question, have you seen Capstone grads go on to pursue mobile app dev careers? Off the top of my head, I don't know if I've seen anybody go into mobile development straight out of Capstone, but I think there are a few people who have gone into mobile, primarily mobile work, as like a second job out of Capstone. I don't know, Surgeon, do you have any anecdotes there?
No, I'm not sure that I know anyone that worked with mobile.
Yeah, so native mobile apps, development is a little bit different than pure like cloud or web development, but it's certainly adjacent. And I would say that students who graduate from Capstone, I think part of the reason it might be tough to go straight into like a native mobile app is because you would have to do some ramp up on the development platforms and languages that are connected to those. But you're more than capable of doing that. And that's why I think generally, if that happens, it's usually as a second job after Capstone, kind of tailoring your work in that direction once you get your first job.
We have an interesting question. Can the Capstone project be developed individually, or is it mandatory to work in a team? Sure, I recognize the benefits of teamwork, but I'm curious to know if working individually is permitted. So working in team is mandatory. And one of the things that employers often ask students is, have they worked in a team? So working in a team is a really, really important thing, an important experience for students. And that's why we are emphasizing that students should work in a team. You need that team experience, and that will help you with your job hunt. Max, do you have anything to add?
Nope. That's
yeah,
that's right.
We have a question. Does the spring cohort meet during the holiday season? I'm not sure what holiday season is during the spring cohort. Sorry, I'm from Europe. So I know that US has like for winter cohort, but I'm not sure for the spring one.
Yeah, so just to give you kind of an overview, during the I guess it would be the fall cohort. So that one runs from late August through December. That one is a little bit unique because everyone has a week off for the US Thanksgiving week. And there are 2 weeks off at the end of the year. The last 2 weeks of the year, everybody has off. So other cohorts don't have those weeks off, but for that cohort that goes in the fall, you have those 3 weeks off. So I love all the questions that we received and really appreciate everything that you've sent so far. We're going to wrap up the session now because we're at the top of the hour. If you haven't had your question answered, though, there are 2 things you can do. One, feel free to post it in the Capstone Info Slack channel. Or 2, if your question is more individual or personal, please reach out to us at capstone@launchschool.com, and we will reach out and have a chat. So thank you again for attending today. Really appreciate it, and really happy about all the interesting Capstone. And yeah, looking forward to talking to you in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.